Cool. So I'll be talking about caching your query data with a package called React Query, right? So I'm a front-end engineer at Archimedes, and we at Archimedes, as well as the previous clients I worked with, always face a lot of issues when it comes to your query data and like how do you cache it, how do you manage it, etc. Right? So the way ideally we would do it is people would either store it in Redux and then like access it or some sort of a global state like context, and that's fine. But then it's kind of not necessary at the same time where you can actually split your global state into your client state. That's anything to do with the client's interactions itself, or you can push it into a separate cache altogether, right? So React Query actually does that, and it's a pretty cool application. I mean, a pretty cool package that gives you a lot of amazing hooks, as well as it helps you sort out your caching and a super cool thing called optimistic UI, which we'll do at the end of the talk. Right, so this is a package and it's pretty famous. It's really active, has a really good community around it. And if you want to check this, I'll put this in the chat after some time. And so here's a website. You can jump over to the docs and you can get a lot of help. And Tanner, the guy who created this, is pretty active on Twitter as well, so you can always like ping him and get your stuff sorted, right? So cool. So let's just get to the code, right? So this is a very simple application I have. Let me just quickly show you what it does. It's basically very simple to do that. Just one second. Yep. So it just has an input field and a button, and we are just rendering out an array of strings, right? So if you see here, I can just hit test. So all this is happening locally, local state, right? So I've already created a node server that it's only for to do. So super simple, and all it does is it gives you an array of strings. That's our to dos basically, and we'll just be rendering them out as well as updating it. So let's just take a look at it in Postman. So this is the um, endpoint. So if you hit send, so we, as of right now, we're receiving an empty array. So obviously, and it's not hooked up, right? So let's go ahead and hook up these things, right? So I've done a bit of initial setup. So the first thing I've done is gone ahead and install Axios, React Query. And let me show you React Query as well as React Query DevTools. It's optional if you want to install this. It gives you a really neat UI in order to check your current queries to see if it's stale, what's active, etc. Right. So let me just jump into the Axios part. Just created a super simple API client so I can access it through this. Right. So let's just go ahead and quickly jump into this. Right. So the first thing we're going to do is let's just get the data from our whole server, and we're just going to render it out. As of right now, we know it's an empty array, so let's just proceed with it anyways, right? So the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to import, oh my god, okay, import from React Query. Right, so we're going to get a few things here, right? So let me just explain to you the first thing. So the first thing is called the query cache. So the query cache is like a main interface with React Query. You can update, get, etc. Like a lot of stuff you can do through this. The second thing we're going to take is use query, right? So use query is the one we're going to be using to actually get the query, right? So let's go ahead and see how this works. So use query takes in two things. The first argument will be a unique key to identify the data, and the second thing would be the function that's going to fetch the data, right? So let's just actually go ahead and write it here. So let's just say const get data is an async function, and we're going to be we'll put this in a try catch. So we're going to try to get we know we're going to get data, so we're going to say await and API client that's imported. We're going to get at the this is the route slash to do, so slash to do's, right? And the next thing we have to do is we just have to return the data. Okay, just return the data. And now let's just handle a catch. So we can just, as of right now, just log it out. So this is a very simple get data function where we're just using Axios to hit a certain endpoint and get the data returned from it and just return it, right? So now let's go ahead and add use query into this. So let me just add it below here. So let's just say const. We're going to destructure some things out of this. So let's just say is equal to use query, and the first argument is going to be a unique key. So since this is to do's, let's call it to do's. And the second argument is going to be your get data function. So this function, the main thing is it has to return the data itself, right? And you just have to handle it in a certain way. Cool. So the few things we get out of this is an is loading state. So it tells you the state, is it loading or not? And we get a bunch of other things, but I'm not going to jump into them. I'm just going to focus on the data, right? So the data itself is going to be the one we're getting out of here. Anyways, so let's go ahead and just render this out for right now. Let's just use a pre-tag JSON dot stringify. Let's just say data null and 2. So you'll see this is empty. So now if I type in something here, you see it instantly happens because this is all state, right? So we'll be looking at a few ways we will be implementing React query again. Cool. Now that this is rendering, let's just hook it up to this. So we know our to-dos, which is a current hook. We are not going to be using that to render. Rather, we're going to take the data. So let me just clear the pre-tag and move this over to data. String, and let's just say string. Right. Okay. So that is basically the first part of it. Now we're going to be getting the data. So if we hit save and we go back here, my bad. 1 second. We are not getting this. This is weird. Just give me 1 sec, guys. Uh, uh, uh. Data.map is returning this string. Did I miss anything? Anyone? If you guys can just like.
I think Russell, you are not sharing your screen right now. I think screen share stopped right now.
Oh, did it?
Yeah. Can you reshare?
Oh, yeah, it did stop. Yeah, is that fine? Yeah,
Yes,
so I'm just
yes, now
getting a weird error. Okay, so
is loading false initially, so data is
yes, so I need to handle that state. My bad. So let's just say if is loading and we don't have data, right? Then we're going to handle. Let's just take these divs out here. Let's close this and need another div that already have these things created. Is styles dot center to do, and we're going to be using and designs in okay, so it's not from es, just and d, and we also going to say the size is large, so we're just making sure this centers, right? Cool. That should resolve this. Okay, so now you see it's going to be fetching the data. So let me just jump into the server quickly and add a string value so we can just see it work. Just refresh this. So this is coming from the server. So cool, this part's great. We are getting the stuff and this is also being stored in our cache. So if I ever navigate another route and come back, it's always going to be there. Or I can just dip into React queries query cache and pick it up. So that's part one. And the second thing is, now let's go ahead and implement the mutation part of it, right? Which is the more interesting part. So for mutation to work, again, we have to pass it this sort of a function where we post the data, right? So let's go ahead and create that. So let's just say const post data is an async function. We'll get back to all of this, right? And let's just wrap this into a try catch. So let's just say const, you're going to destructure something out of it, await API client dot post, and the endpoint I have set up is add dash to dos, right? And the next thing we're going to be passing is arguments. So let's take the args from here. And let's go ahead and pass it here. So now we need to tell it what type this is, right? So since I'm using TypeScript, I know the type. So it's going to be an object that is going to contain to do and is going to be a string, right? So now that that is set up, now let's just handle the error. Okay, so that would be just console logging it as of right now, just to keep it super simple, right? So this is a very simple post data function. Again, you can just use your own error handling as well as make other changes you have to, etc. So what we're destructuring out again is the data, because that's what we want, and we'll also have to return the data. Right. Okay. So now let's go ahead and implement it the way we've done it here. So let's jump up here and let's pick up something called use mutation. So use mutation works very similar to the way React's use state works. So let's go ahead and let me just keep this destruction array. Just let me leave this as of right now is equal to use mutation. And with the first argument here is going to be passing the fetch itself. I mean the post, my bad. So that's the first one. So the second thing we can pass to this is a config object, but we just look into this at a slight level right now. In the next part of this, we'll just deep dive a little bit more. Right. So let's go ahead and just leave it out for right now. So let's just call this mutate to do. So this can be anything, and we're just going to call it mutate to do. Right. So what we're going to do now is the handle submit, since this is in a form, and every time the button someone hits the button, the add to do button, that's when we're going to go ahead and call handle submit. So as of right now, let's remove the state value because we're not going to be using that. So let's go ahead and hit uh, mutate to do, and the first thing we have to pass to mutate to do itself is this is obviously an object which we've already defined up here, and the argument would be to do, and we need the value. So where is this value coming from, right? So this is actually a React state here. This value item is basically the input. So whatever you type into the input field will be getting passed as this. So this error is because you're not handling a promise, but that's fine. Okay, so let's just go ahead and try this out. So that this is anyways coming from the server. So let me refresh and let me just hit test and hit enter. And if I refresh, obviously the cache is not updated because we didn't tell it to. So if we refresh now, we are getting this test string from the server, right? So now there are two ways where we can handle the way we show the data to the user itself, right? So let's do the first one where we refetch all the queries. When I mean all the queries, whatever we tell it to. So in now the only thing we're telling it to do is the to do's query because we have called it to do's, right? The unique key. So let's go ahead into the use mutation and jump to the configs array. And the one thing we're going to hit here is on success, right? So on success is called as the name descriptively tells you after the call is successful and there's no issues whatsoever. So this will receive a function. And now this is when we're going to dip into React queries query cache. So let's go ahead and say query cache dot refresh queries, and now we just need to tell it which query to refresh, right? So now that we know we've called it to do's, it will go ahead and call to do's. So now let's go ahead and jump back here and let's test this, right? So let's just call this test 2, and this kind of happens instantly, so it's fine, right? But no, the reason why it's happening instantly is because my server is locally running, so it's going to be really fast. Like you see, it's like just 2 sub millisecond speed. So now let's go ahead and mimic that we are on a super slow 3G connection, right? And let's just keep an eye on the network tab. So let's just say slow net and let's hit enter. So you see it's waiting for it to post the data, and then finally once the data is posted and it comes back to React and it tells it like, hey, we have posted the data, that is when on success is finally called, and then again there's a round trip made to the server to get the data back. It's not really great, right? So if I do it again, you'll see like it's going to take a couple of seconds, and assuming your user has slow internet, this is really bad, and this is something we don't want the user to experience at all. Okay, so how can we resolve this? So we're going to use a design pattern, more of an implementation called optimistic UI. So the way optimistic UI works is the moment I type in something here and I hit enter, I'm going to tell React Query to assume that is already posted into my server, and it's going to immediately show it here. So in the background is when the actual stuff happens, right? So in the background, it's going to make a call and it's going to see if it's successful or not. If it is successful, it is going to refetch the data and everything is normal, right? So the user never sees this part of it. It is all happening in the background. But if there is an error, this is when we'll immediately roll back, and this thing will basically disappear, right? So whatever new stuff you've added. So let me firstly just clear out what's in my server. So yeah, now that that's clear, if you refresh, this should disappear too. So let's go ahead and try out the way we can implement the optimistic UI. Great. So let's just close this because we don't really need that right now. So let's go ahead and let me close this out. So we have to implement it within the configs, right? So we are going to use three other options over here. One being on mutate, on settled, and on error. These the first three. So we don't really need this right now. So let's just close it out. So let's go to the on mutate first, right? So the way on mutate works is the moment a user goes ahead and clicks on something and this is immediately invoked, this is going to be the first thing that's going to run, right? So now that we know that, so let's go ahead and this is going to be a function. Let's go ahead and write the code, right? So what we're going to be receiving here is the to do data. That is the string we have typed in our value, right? So that is basically this. This is an object that's going to contain to-dos. So let's go ahead and take out to-do, destructure it out, right? And now let's go ahead and see how we can implement this. So there are 4 steps you'll have to do in order to get it, right? The first thing is to cancel queries or whatever there is related to to-dos. That is the first thing. The second thing is take a snapshot, right? And you have to take a snapshot of to-dos, right? So if just in case there's an error, we can always like save it, and that's going to be very handy to us. The second thing is actually wait, just make the update, right? So we're going to manually, optimistically rather, make the state update, and that should be completely fine. And the last thing we'll have to do is we have to return a function that's going to return the snapshot, right? Yes. So let's just go through these things one at a time and just understand how these things work, right? So the first thing we'll have to do is cancel the ongoing query, which is the only one query, which is called to-dos, right? So let's go back to query cache, which we're importing from React Query, dot, let's just say cancel queries, and we have to pass it a key. So this is going to be to-dos. So if there is any query running at this point in time, it's going the first thing it's going to do is cancel it out so it doesn't really interfere and like ruin the whole process of it. The second thing we have to do is get the previous or the current, rather, what is in the current cache, and let's save that, right? So let's just call this const prev to dos, right, is equal to, let's jump back into query cache dot I think we can get query data, and the first we just have to pass one argument, that is to dos. So if you dip into this, if you log this, basically you're going to see an array of whatever array of strings which is saved currently into a cache, right? That's the ones we've fetched so far. So the final thing is going ahead and making that update itself, where we can we'll optimistically set this, right? So the way we're going to do this, again, we're going to jump into query cache and we're going to manually post these things, right? So let's go ahead and say query cache dot set query data, right? And the first argument of this is obviously going to be the key. So it knows where to go ahead and update the stuff. So the second thing, we're going to receive a function and we will do something with this, right? So what we're going to receive here is the current to-dos, right? So this is going to be, let's just call this old for now, right? So this is basically the current array of strings. Again, we could have also used this, but let's just use this because it's far better, right? So the way we are going to do this is, we know this is an array, and the first thing we'll have to do is we have to spread out the old array, and then we'll have to update the current to do, right? So that's how we'll have to do this thing. Again, remember, it's an array of strings, so we have to spread out the old array of strings, and then we can add the new to do. So this is throwing an error, so let's just say as any for right now. So this won't throw an error. And now this line has basically gone and updated our current cache, which we are reading from, and we are seeing the updated stuff. And remember, this doesn't mean your data has already been saved onto your backend. Rather, we're optimistically doing it, right? So the last thing is we'll return a function that we'll go to One second. Go to query your cache. Then we are going to say set query data. And over here is where we are going to basically say to dos. And we are going to, oh my bad, we are going to set the previous to dos, right? So just in case there's an error, there's any sort of this will be used somewhere else. I will show you where. So these previous to dos always safe, right? So we can always access them just in case there's an error, right? So the second thing, let's handle the error case, right? So let's say on error, and over here we're going to receive a few arguments, but let's go ahead and just write this out. So the first thing is we're going to receive the error itself, and then we're going to receive the to do, basically the to do that's being passed through, and the final one is a rollback function, right? So this function is going to get this data, right, the previous data, and that's how it's going to like roll back the stuff, and we'll know what exactly happened. So let's go ahead and hit roll back. I'm not sure of the type, so let's just say any as of right now. So if there's any error here, we are just going to use the rollback function, and we are going to basically update the current cache with whatever we had before the call was made, right? So it's back to the normal state. There's nothing that happened. And finally, there's an on settle that's called, right? So on settled is called when everything has completed after every error, and if there is an error of the success, final thing that's called is an on settled. So the way we have to handle the on settled is we have to tell React Query that you have to invalidate the cache because there has been some changes, and you'll have to refetch it. So instead of us refetching it manually, we can just tell React Query to invalidate a particular cache item in the cache, and it will go ahead and fetch the new data. So let's just go ahead and do that. So let's say React Query cache dot invalidate queries, and all we have to do is tell it to invalidate to do. So this will go ahead and handle the rest of it for us, right? So now let's just jump back to the code, and we'll see how this works once this refreshes. So again, I'm on slow 3G, remember that. So let's just say test, and you'll see things are happening instantly, right? Which is crazy. So now let's keep an eye on the tab at the bottom, right? So test again. So what's going to happen now is we will show this test again instantly because you're updating the cache, as well as you'll see the calls that are happening here, and you'll see it post the data and stuff. So this is going to be pending for like some time. So let's just hit enter and see this immediately shows through, and we are still seeing it. So the first one you saw, this is basically it posting it, and the last one you saw it happen again. Let me show you. It happens again. That is when invalidate, see, there you go. That's when invalidate query works, and React Query refreshes stuff in the background. So it updates our source of truth, basically, right? So this has been my talk, and this is basically React Query itself. That's how I work with it. You can follow me on Twitter or GitHub for like some more stuff about these things. But I'm a huge React Query fan. And to answer your questions, the main one would be yes, there are alternatives to this. There is definitely Apollo client if you're using that. There's SWR by Zeit, now Vercel, and there are a lot of these other options. But React Query is something I personally use, and it has like really good support, and it's an upcoming package, if you will. So that's basically my talk. Hope that was helpful, and I'll post this code on GitHub so you guys can like take a look at it.